If you like to make your NFL games a little bit more interesting, you've come to the right place. It's the Even Money Podcast with Ross Tucker and Steve Fezzik.
Yeah, Vegas, baby, Vegas. It is the Even Money Podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. Use the code Ross whether you're playing best ball. We are still taking entries, by the way, for the best ball draft against me and Joe Dolan on the Fantasy Feast podcast. I'm announcing all the winners tomorrow on tomorrow's Fantasy Feast. So not only should you be listening or watching the Fantasy Feast podcast for Tiers of Dolan as Joe goes through his tiered rankings for every position for season-long fantasy, daily fantasy, whatever, but you also can still enter to get a free entry into a best ball draft against me and Joe over at DraftKings. Just use the code Ross, but really use any of the sponsors you hear us reference on today's show. Email it to me right away, ross@rosstucker.com, and either say, Ross, I want to take you and Joe down in the best ball draft, or I just want to ask Steve a question. And by Steve, we're talking about the legend that is Steve Fezzik, the only two-time winner of the Super Bowl of professional football wagering. That is the Super Contest. You can check him out on social media and only on social media at Fezzik Sports. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. Most of you know by now, but we get new listeners every week, every year, which is really exciting. I'm a former NFL offensive lineman, 2001 to 2008. I actually found out last night that I was teammates with 8 different starting quarterbacks for the Washington Redskins back in the day, which is hard to do. Off the top of my head, it was Jeff George, Tony Banks, Shane Matthews, Danny Werfel, Patrick Ramsey. That was my first year and a half. And then when I came back in 2007, Mark Brunell, Jason Campbell, Todd Collins. So 8 starting quarterbacks that I was teammates with in Washington in 2.5 years. That is hard to do. Do the math. At any rate, thankfully, I played for a while and it got me all these gigs. I got the Eagles preseason game Saturday, hosting the Minnesota Vikings. Then week 1 college football next week. I'll be flying right over Steve's head. UCLA at Hawaii. Week 1, 7:30 p.m. Eastern time, prime time, CBS. Can't wait, but we have more time to talk about that next week. Speaking of next week, Steve, next week we will do our official season win total plays. Now, those of you that listen year-round or watch youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL like you should year-round, you know that we've already given out some of our season win total numbers multiple times this offseason. But we like to do it, after the preseason games, once the rosters are more or less settled. So we'll do that next week. And then, Steve, the week after that, it's NFL Week 1. I mean, we will be fully in it. I need to confirm with our guy Grades, our Australian sensation, that he is doing all the grading again this year, all of the spreadsheets. Please, Grades. It is unbelievable. Remember, we post our official play spreadsheet every week on my Patreon, patreon.com/RT Media. It's like $10 a month. That's the best deal in betting. $10 a month, so you don't have to write them down while you're listening to the show or watching the show. Patreon.com/RT Media. You'll be part of our private Slack channel. You'll get the spreadsheet. You will be all set, ready to go. Speaking of week 1, just so you guys know the way that Steve operates. Steve already texting me, and then before we start the show, he says, I have a week 1 bet I really want to make. I really want it to be an official play. It's not going to be there in 2 weeks. Can I give it out today? To which I say, yeah, why not, Steve? There are no rules. We make up the show. It is the Even Money Betting Podcast. I think, I got to check, we might be the #1 ranked NFL betting podcast. I ran into a guy Sunday at the Windrift. I think he said his name was Chris Russell. Just walking out of a bar, and he's like, are you Ross? I said, yeah. He's like, oh, I love the Even Money Podcast, you and Fezzik. Can I get a selfie? I want to send it to my buddies. They all listen to the show too. So that was pretty awesome. All right, Enough blabbing from me. Steve, give it to me. What's your week one bet? You got to get off your chest.
Oh, boom. So there's two teams that I have radically changed my perception of just in the past 2 weeks. Bad news, Ross. Pittsburgh Steelers. I know you're from Pennsylvania, but more Philly. Pittsburgh is struggling. Both quarterbacks look bad. Warren, the running back, injured, so now more of a workhorse for Najee early in the year. I don't see anything I like about the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Atlanta Falcons, they're in it to win it. They bolstered that suspect defense. So I'm much more bullish on Atlanta. I'm bearish on Pittsburgh, and they're playing each other. Bottom line is Atlanta Falcons, week one at home, -2.5. We're getting the much better team, and they're now laying 2.5. You might recall earlier in the summer, I liked Pittsburgh +3. I have completely changed on this game. Let's lock in Atlanta for double what we bet during the summer. We can still lay the -2.5. Love the Atlanta Falcons.
Wow. So that's a good question, Steve, because I'm always curious how much you take into account these preseason games. You know, this is the final week of the preseason, week 3, but we've got 2 games thus far. Now, I can totally see you changing your opinion of the Falcons with them adding Matthew Judon to rush off the edge in a contract year coming off of that injury. I mean, I thought he was the Patriots' best player the last couple of years. And then Justin Simmons to pair him on the back end with Jesse Bates, who was, I thought, an all-pro level safety last year. You're right. Can you imagine if the Falcons had taken a good defensive player at 8 or traded down and taken a good defensive player? They could really be cooking with gas. Instead, no, they took Penix. That's a whole other story. But that's interesting. So the Falcons part is mainly the players they've added. But the Steelers component of it is really you take into account what you're seeing and not liking.
Yeah, and I'm not on an island here. You've got far better analysts that know how to judge all these quarterbacks, and there's pretty much a consensus that Fields is not seeing the ball well. He's having trouble, with the center interchange. He's not going to be behind center week 1, and so maybe that doesn't matter. But Russell Wilson looks washed, and I don't think there's any optimism in Pittsburgh regarding either one of these quarterbacks. I'm loving my Pittsburgh season win under 8.5. And like I said, Nightmare Steelers season starts week 1 with a loss in the ATL.
Speaking of a loss, Steve, now might be a good time to talk about last week, preseason week 2. You said, well, actually, before we get to your bets, okay, because that's going to be a longer conversation. The first thing I want to make sure everybody knows is that Smirnoff is the world's #1 vodka and an official vodka partner of the NFL. It's award-winning vodka. It started in 1864, if you can believe that. Here's what I did recently, and it's really cool. You grab a bottle of Smirnoff at your local retailer. You go to Smirnoff.com to find recipes of delicious cocktails perfect for game day. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Okay, so Steve, let's get back to what we were saying. Before we get to your preseason bets, any other takeaways, right? So your one takeaway is what you said about Russell Wilson, what you said about Justin Fields, what you said about the Steelers. Are there any other teams, situations that you've seen enough to feel strongly about them or perhaps change your opinion about them?
So let's have 3 up arrow teams and 3 down arrow teams. So teams I'm now more bullish on for the 2024 season. We spoke about them, the Atlanta Falcons. Also, Chicago Bears have to upgrade the Bears. Caleb Williams looking good. And more significantly, Denver Broncos. It looks like Bo Nix can play. Hey, the Broncos season win number, 5.5. Money coming in on the over makes sense. The Broncos didn't have a quarterback a month ago. No, I'm not so sure. They might have a quarterback, Ross. Your thoughts?
He's looked very, very good. I thought it was interesting. Greg Cosell on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast last week still felt like Bo was playing a little bit fast. But, 61 college starts, Steve. That's got to be a record, right? 61 college starts for Bo Nix. And honestly, he looks like it. He's playing like it. I think the question, Steve, for Bo Nix was always, what's going to be the ceiling? The belief was really smart young man, ton of experience. The question was, is he good enough, talented enough to be a above average starter, or is he destined to be kind of a below average starter, high end backup type with the belief that he didn't have overwhelming physical ability? So that's an interesting point by you. What about the 3 down arrows?
Yeah, so down arrows, Pittsburgh Steelers. We spoke about that. Both their quarterbacks looking like they're not going to be ready to be able to thrive. New England Patriots. Patriots had the look of an NBA team tanking. I just bet the Patriots on an adjusted season win under 3.5 wins. I got 3-1, Ross. I fully expect to cash that ticket. I think the Patriots are absolutely going to be the worst team in the NFL. And my Las Vegas Raiders, what was that? Week 2, where they get rolled by the Cowboys. If there was one theme we saw, is that when the betting markets this past week and the money poured in on a team that was playing their starters, this just happened with Denver crushing Green Bay, a lot of times the money got there and won. Not with the Raiders against the Cowboys. Raiders closed a big favorite, and I got to be honest, I'm glad I didn't have to make the decision who was going to be the starting quarterback, because Minshew and O'Connell, I thought both looked bad. The Raiders will go with Minshew because they're paying him $15 million, so they kind of have to. I think it's going to be a long season for my Raiders.
Interesting. There's a lot there. It's hard to kind of argue with anything you just said, except, I don't know, Steve, under 3.5 wins? That doesn't happen very often.
Getting 3-1, Ross. 3-1. And if you look at that schedule, they better, New England, they better win week 2 at home against Seattle, because they're going to be a 7-point plus underdog in all 7 other games in the first half of the season. They don't get that game. They could easily start 0-8. By the way, I think the week 1 against the Bengals, I think that spread's going to 10. I think we'll see our first double-digit spread of the year shortly.
Steve, let's get into your overarching theme last week, your bet, which was taking all the overs. How'd that work out for you, Steve?
So poorly, very poorly. One time I went to see Seinfeld in the Coliseum at Caesar's Palace, and his plane got delayed, and he showed up an hour late. And the first thing he said was, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was just wrong. And, I got to give kudos to my buddy, the Hitman. I was talking about this, and I was yelling at him because we disagreed. And he was saying, Steve, there's a whole bunch of joint practices this week. And because of that, when teams do these joint practices, they get more work than they ever would get in during the game. And a lot of these coaches feel it's sufficient, and then they don't feel they have to play their starters. And it just becomes like a glorified exhibition, like a Hall of Fame game. And essentially, I think that's what happened with a lot of these games where coaches, heck, their number 1 quarterback, they weren't even playing their number 2 quarterback in some instances. And I just think the preseason game has changed with perspective to that. What's curious, Ross, is that I'm a closing line value kind of guy. And the marketplace largely embraced my idea, maybe because some people copied it, but I had good closing line value. I played a lot of games like over 36 that closed 39 or 40. What was most curious that I wanted to ask you about is that the last 2 games that were Sunday night, we'd already seen all but 2 of the games go under the total, and yet those totals were still sitting there at 39, despite all the unders. Then both of those games went under as well. So the market just refused to embrace the fact that no one was scoring this past week. Clearly, it seems like there's been a shift in how coaches are treating the preseason in week 2. Your thoughts on it?
Well, it's funny because our buddy Warren Sharp, who joins us every year, typically multiple times a year, he had some interesting numbers to back this up, Steve. So through 2 weeks, it's been the worst preseason for offenses in recent memory. Going back 7 years to 2017 and looking at weeks 1 and 2, 15.6 points per game. That's the worst over the last 7 years. Negative 0.13 EPA per play, expected points added. That's the worst. 35% success rate per play, worst. Minus zero point 0.1 EPA per dropback, worst. 6.2 yards per attempt, worst. 60.9% completion rate, second worst. Here's what I think is interesting too, Steve. Looking only at first quarters, so this is when starters would be more likely to play. 2.9 first quarter points per game, worst. Negative 0.21 EPA per play, worst by far. 35% success, worst by far. Negative 0.22 EPA per dropback, worst by far. 6.0 yards per attempt, worst by far. His questions were, is it fewer coaches caring? Is it fewer starters playing? I definitely think it's fewer starters playing, but I also don't know, Steve, that it's that different than the last few years. You know what I mean? Do I think less starters play than 10 years ago? Of course. But to be the worst by far over the last, I don't know that it's that much different from a year ago. I don't know that there's a stark contrast between how much starters are playing a year ago versus now. And I know they're not game planning much and all that stuff. I guess I start to wonder a little bit, Steve, at what point do we look to some of the unders week one thinking that, part of this is perhaps the defense is just having a better feel for offenses in general? I will say I can only speak sometimes to the games I do, but the Eagles played several starters on defense against the Patriots. They did not play any starters on offense, right? So part of that's because I think Fangio wanted that probably, and the Eagles have some new guys on defense, but that's just one example.
It's a great question. What's going to be the impact on week one? Because we haven't seen any impact. None of those week one totals have really been hit at all. What's interesting is there's some very smart guys out there that have been advocating how there's going to be overs in the NFL this year, the new kickoff rules. Certainly, and on an island, just the new kickoff rules alone is going to increase scoring. Now, that doesn't mean scoring is going to increase because there's other factors. If the other factors are more significant than depress scoring, the kickoff change isn't going to be enough necessarily to overcome that. It's only going to be worth about 1.5 to increase scoring to have the new kickoff rules. So, but there were a lot of guys that were ready to fire in on overs liberally and been talking about select games. And now all we're seeing is the defense is dominating. You mentioned the Philly game. What a terrible performance by New England, only getting 13 points, but hey, get in line, New England. So many other teams fall into that bucket. I would selectively be looking at some unders. One I was looking at was the Chargers. You got to worry about their offense and Herbert not getting any time in practice with his plantar fasciitis and his new receivers. Raiders don't have any offense, and that total sitting on 43. I would look under that 43 for one select under I'd look for at week one. What happened to the unders last week and the overs? What was the final tally? Well, it's interesting. It was 2 overs, 14 unders. However, if you played it open, you stole 2 other games. So I think there were 4 overs if you played versus the openers, where you got there, games landing 38, that opened 36.5, and then closed like 40.5. So either way, it was just 2 and 14 to the under. I don't ever remember such an under-driven week.
Yeah, but that's still a good, I feel like that's still a good lesson there, right? In terms of the fact that you won 2 more bets if you got it at the opening line. That's one of the things we talk about all the time on the show.
Hey, I was wrong, but other people were even more wrong in their betting. I mean, I was betting over 36.5 and losing, and other people were betting over 38 and losing on a lot of these games. Hooray.
I'm telling you right now, Steve, you can never go wrong with the Game Time app. I can't even imagine what the Game Time app is like for you in Vegas with all the events out there. It must be awesome. I use it to see what's going on. Like there's a monster truck live rally at the Wells Fargo Center on Saturday for $35, which, by the way, is after the Eagles play the Vikings at 1 p.m. So that seems like $33. Those of you watching youtube.com/RawSeckerNFL, you can see I'm on it right now. $33, you can go to the Eagles-Vikings preseason game, okay? Have a nice dinner in between, then go to the Hot Wheels monster truck. Tell me that your kid will not tell you you're the best dad of all time, doubling up. They don't know. If they're young enough, they don't know the difference between regular season and preseason. And then you take them to the Hot Wheels monster truck live. Love me the Game Time app. They got the lowest price guarantee. The seat view from where you're looking is incredible. Take the guesswork out of buying any tickets, including concert tickets, with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code MONEY, MONEY, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So again, create an account and redeem code MONEY for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. While we're giving out guarantees here, Steve, I guarantee I will delete some Labatt Blue Lights this weekend with my friends after that Eagles-Vikings game. Labatt Blue Light, by far my favorite light beer. Living life to the power of we, with friends, family. Always enjoying it responsibly, of course. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Steve, what do you have for week 3 preseason bets, if anything?
So I've got nothing official. By the way, I might add with your suggested schedule, I would go with the Labatt Blue Light during the football game. No, I would save it. I would do the Smirnoff during the football game at dinner. Then I take in the Labatt Blue Light at the monster truck rally. Saturday. Don't miss it. I'm a big believer in fading line moves in preseason. You see this information coming out, enormous line moves. Kudos to people getting ahead of it, and there were quite a few middles that hit the past 2 weeks, but a couple games have steamed. I could only look. San Fran's at Vegas. Vegas was terrible last week. I have to feel, given that horrible performance, we are going to see a better performance from the Raiders. They're catching 5.5 against the 49ers. I would only look that way. Another game, I would look towards the dog. I know Pittsburgh needs a good showing, but the Detroit Lions, Ross, are catching 6 points now against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It looks like too many points to me. Bottom line, I don't care that Detroit's going to play all their backups. I would still only look at Detroit catching 6.
Got it. Let's get to one email question here quick, Steve, because people love it. Dear Ross and Steve, on future NFL markets, I found a book that had a mistake on Chris Olave's touchdowns. Market consensus has the over-under for Olave at 5.5. Juice on the under. But this one book has it at 8.5. How would you approach it? Bet only the under 8.5 since that's the one with the plus EV? Or do you play over 5.5 EV and under 8.5 minus 112 and hope to hit both?
All right, so great question. So let's assume that you normally bet $200 a game and your maximum bet is $700. All right, that's the most you're comfortable with your bankroll. So you're going to make a max bet here on Olave on this off number under 8.5, despite him being, a talented wide receiver, just a bridge too far. All right, let's say the book has a $1,000 limit on this. Well, it's such a great bet. Of course, I'm going to make a max bet of $1,000. And you're like, but wait, Steve, you just said your maximum exposure is $700. Okay, so I'm going to bet $1,000. But I'm going to play back $300 on the market number. I'm going to go over 5.5 even money at some other book to pare down my $1,000 exposure to where I'm doing $300 bet on the middle and a $700 bet, my max bet on the under. That's how I would personally play it.
Love it, Steve. So far up. Season win total, official season win total bets next week. Good luck, everybody. Hope you guys win some money.
Thanks for tuning in to Even Money. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.